So y'all want to answer the question, what is depression cloth?
Okay. So
I'll let Ron do that one. Gives me a headache.
Scouting had, and I'll answer two questions. I'll answer the other one about color. So in the early days, the manufacture of cloth, I'll start with the color and then I'll go to the depression. At the mill, they could not make the same color of cloth over and over and over. It's just impossible back in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s. They did not have laser colorimeters like we do today. What they actually had, if you know paint samples, like you go to the Lowe's and you get a paint sample, they actually had a trifold. I have one that's a trifold that in the center has a sample of, this is the target. On the left-hand side, it says, this is 2 tan. And on the right-hand side, it says 2 green. And as long as the dye lot was somewhere in between that, you ship it and sell it. And Scouting accepted it. So you get from tan all the way to green in the early days. It just happens to be which dye lot you're pulling fabric from. So that's about the color. Now, Scouting, as we know, has never been an inexpensive organization. And the uniforms back in the early days, if you look at the pricing for the time, was very expensive. In the time of the Depression, things became hard to get. And most importantly, money was scarce. So Scouting asked the manufacturer what they could do to lower the cost of the uniform. And the manufacturer said, we can reduce the size of the thread, thus lowering the weight per square yard of fabric, which is how fabric is measured, by taking a square yard and throwing it on the scales. So they reduced the weight, which also opened up the weave. So if you look at old Scouting stuff from the 20s, whether they're merit badges, rank badges, if you hold them up to the light, that could be the light on your computer screen, it could be a 50-watt light bulb, but if you hold them a few feet away from that, the early cloth is dense and heavy, and you can't see through it. In the Depression period, because they reduced the size and weight of the threads that made up the fabric, if you hold that same piece of fabric from the that early 30 period up to the light, it's like looking at a screen door. Light passes through it, but it's the thick cloth, but it's not as large in thread size. So the other thing, the other important piece
and it
is
falls
the
apart when you wash it.
Fell apart when you washed it, yes. So it was only around for 1 year.
Very nice. I love it. So who knows when adults could earn badges, which is basically the time they could not earn Eagle.
Didn't they change that in like the 60s?
I think it's generally considered 1965 or so when they added youth leadership requirements, they didn't, which effectively excluded adults from earning Eagle Scout.
Yep. Very good, Tim. You win a trivia question of the day.
Yeah,
Any other?
the fact that somebody like myself, who would have turned 18 in 61, was told that I could no longer earn merit badges once I turned 18. So that may have been a council activity, interpretation, or whatever, but I know very explicitly I was told, you're 18, you can no longer earn any badges.
I heard 61 was the day. So you were there, Joseph. You win that answer.
Yeah, I'm sure it was earlier than that, earlier than 61.
Yeah, I think it's earlier too. I mean, that was the type of thing. I mean, I knew the fact when I turned 18, I was not going to be able to do it. So it
No,
didn't come out in that year.
people were doing it in the 50s. I mean,
Yes, that I understood.
I think it's late 50s is when they changed it.
I think they were discouraging it a long time before it actually became an official you can't. That's what I
yeah.
always understood. I don't remember the date that it became an official you can't, but it was already being discouraged by then.
And
Well, they did a part of it because of World War II, so the kids were being drafted at 17 and stuff before they could fish or eagle and stuff. So they were, going off to war. So when they came back, they were allowed to finish their eagle, is what I was told.
That makes sense.
One-
And L. Brown keeps asking us,
Yeah.
is star really after life? And in the early years, that's exactly correct. It was life
Yep.
before star.
it was actually because I thought those were really interesting to look at some of the early requirements. And I mean, some of that stuff was from my collection. Some of it's stuff that I've had and let go. Jeff got one of those pieces of early material from me. But I think it's really special, to have something from one of the first, 240 eagles, essentially. I think that really adds to that piece.
Any other questions? Well, that was really very scholarly, Larry. That was amazing. And I hope people looked at that and have some questions about other things like ranks and how they wore anything in the uniform, where they placed things. So